No one knew. But one thing was clear: the moment wasn't over, and the tension had only just begun. The officer's breathing was steady, but his hands betrayed him, one tightening into a fist at his side, the other still gripping his radio. The weight of the moment pressed on him, the eyes of the crowd burning into his back. He could feel the cameras on him, recording every twitch, every hesitation. He had to say something, but what? The governor stood firm, his gaze unwavering. He had been in tense situations before, in heated political debates, in rooms filled with people who doubted his every move. But this was different. This wasn't about policy or power. This was about perception, about what people saw before they even knew your name. A man in the crowd took a step forward, shaking his head. "This is exactly the problem," he muttered, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. A few nodded in agreement, while others stayed silent, waiting. The officer finally spoke, his voice low but controlled. "I was just doing my job." The governor raised an eyebrow. "Your job?" His voice was calm, but there was something sharp beneath it, something unshakable. "Tell me, officer, what exactly did I do that made you think I needed to leave?" The officer's mouth opened, but no words came. He wanted to find an answer, a justification, anything that could explain away the decision he had made just minutes earlier. But there was nothing. Nothing that would sound right. Nothing that would erase the fact that he had made a mistake. The crowd grew restless. Someone whispered, "Say something, man." Another person muttered, "He knows he messed up." The tension hung in the air, thick and unrelenting. Then, a new voice cut through the silence. A woman in a crisp blazer stepped forward from the crowd. "Governor, are you okay?" she asked, her tone professional but pointed. For the first time since the confrontation began, the governor's gaze shifted. He recognized her, one of his aides, likely having just arrived and now walking straight into the middle of a moment that was spiraling fast. The officer took a step back. His pulse quickened. He could feel the moment slipping away from him, the control, the certainty, gone. But what happened next would change everything. The officer took another step back, his face tense. The weight of his mistake was clear now, but before he could figure out what to do, something unexpected happened. A second officer, older and higher ranking, pushed through the crowd. His badge gleamed under the sun, and his expression was unreadable as he locked eyes with the younger officer. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone firm but measured. The first officer hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "There was a situation," he mumbled. The senior officer's gaze flicked to the governor, then to the crowd, then back to the officer. He didn't need anyone to explain what had happened. He could already see it in the tense faces, the phones still recording, and the way the younger officer stood stiffly, like a man cornered by his own actions. For a long, heavy moment, no one spoke. The street, once filled with murmurs and whispers, was now eerily silent. Then, breaking that silence, the governor let out a slow breath. "This is interesting," he said, his voice measured. "Because a few minutes ago, I was being ordered to leave. And now? Now, it seems no one knows what to say." The younger officer swallowed hard. The senior officer remained still, his jaw tightening slightly. He wasn't just looking at the governor. He was looking at the moment itself, at the undeniable reality playing out before him. And then, just when it seemed like the tension couldn't stretch any further, the governor's aide spoke again. But this time, her words made the entire crowd freeze. "Governor," she said, lowering her voice, "we just got word. There was a security alert. A suspicious individual spotted nearby." The crowd stirred. A few exchanged nervous glances. The governor's expression shifted slightly, but he kept his composure. "And?" he asked. The aide hesitated. "And the description matched you." A sharp silence fell over the street. The governor didn't move, didn't even blink. The first officer's face turned red, his breath unsteady. The senior officer exhaled slowly, the weight of the revelation pressing down on everyone at once. The crowd, which had been filled with whispers of frustration moments ago, was now holding its breath for an entirely different reason. Because now the question wasn't just about what had happened, it was about who had made it happen. And no one was ready for the answer. The weight of the aide's words settled over the street like a thick fog, a security alert, a suspicious individual, and the description had matched *him*. The hospital hallways buzzed with activity, but in one quiet corner of the maternity ward, a newborn lay alone. Nurses passed by, casting sympathetic glances at the tiny baby who had already been abandoned by the world. No one wanted him, not his birth parents, not the families looking to adopt. His medical complications scared them away. His future looked uncertain, until one man stepped forward. Dr. Matthew Carter had seen thousands of newborns in his career, but something about this little boy stopped him in his tracks. Maybe it was the way his tiny fingers curled around his own, or maybe it was the thought of him growing up without love. Whatever it was, Dr. Carter made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. He adopted the baby no one else wanted. As the years passed, the boy, named Oliver, flourished under Dr. Carter's care. With a loving home and the best medical attention, he grew into a bright, happy child. His once uncertain future now brimmed with possibilities. He laughed, played, and dreamed just like any other kid. The bond between father and son became unbreakable. But just when life seemed perfect, everything changed. 10 years later, an ordinary afternoon turned into a nightmare. It started with a simple medical test, one that Dr. Carter had ordered just as a routine checkup. But when the results came back, his heart nearly stopped. His hands trembled as he read the papers, his face draining of color. Something was terribly wrong. The child he had raised, loved, and called his son was not who he thought he was. What had he just uncovered, and how could a single test threaten to destroy the life they had built together? What Dr. Carter discovered that day would shake him to his core and lead to a truth he never saw coming. Stay tuned, because this story is just getting started. Dr. Carter sat frozen, staring at the test results in his hands. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. It didn't add up. Oliver had been a fragile baby when he first adopted him, but over the years he had grown into a healthy, energetic boy. There had never been any signs, no clues that something this shocking could be lurking beneath the surface. With trembling fingers, he flipped through the pages again. Maybe there had been a mistake. Maybe the lab had mixed up the samples. But deep down, he knew that was just wishful thinking. The name on the report was clear. The DNA markers were undeniable. His son wasn't really his son. The thought sent a cold chill down his spine. Dr. Carter had spent the last 10 years raising Oliver, loving him as his own. Every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every proud moment, it had all been real. And yet, this piece of paper threatened to rewrite everything he thought he knew. He needed answers. Digging through old files, he found the adoption papers, his hands unsteady as he scanned through them. The documents had been airtight, legally binding, with no reason to doubt their legitimacy. But now, with this discovery, doubt crept into every corner of his mind. Had someone lied to him? Had the hospital hidden something from him all those years ago? Or worse, had Oliver been taken from someone who never stopped searching for him? Dr. Carter's breath quickened as the possibilities swirled in his head. He knew he couldn't ignore this. Whatever the truth was, he owed it to Oliver to find out. But as he reached for his phone to make the first call, something stopped him. A feeling deep in his gut, an unshakable sense that whatever lay ahead would change everything, not just for him, but for Oliver too. And once he uncovered the truth, there would be no going back. Dr. Carter paced the floor, his mind spinning. He had spent a decade building a life with Oliver, pouring every ounce of love he had into raising him. And now, a single test threatened to unravel it all. He needed to be sure. Maybe there was an explanation, something simple he had overlooked. But deep down, he knew, this wasn't a mistake. That night, he barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, memories of Oliver's childhood played in his mind. The first time he called him Dad, the way he gripped his hand tightly when he was scared, the birthday parties, the bedtime stories, the moments that made them a family. No matter what the test said, nothing could erase those years. By morning, he had made up his mind. He needed answers. But where would he start? The hospital where Oliver had been left as a baby? The adoption agency? Or was there someone else who had been keeping secrets all along? His first stop was the hospital. He walked through the same hallways where he had first held Oliver, where he had made the decision to adopt him. But now, instead of joy, he felt unease. He approached the records department, flashing his credentials as a doctor to get access to the old files. The drive home felt endless. Every red light, every slow car in front of them made Dr. Carter's heart pound harder. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. What if he was already too late? What if they had taken Oliver? But as he pulled into his driveway, relief and fear crashed into him all at once. The house was still standing. The door was closed. No signs of a struggle, yet something felt off. He rushed inside, calling Oliver's name. Silence. His stomach twisted. Then, footsteps. A small figure appeared at the top of the stairs. Oliver, rubbing his eyes, confused. "Dad? What's going on?" Dr. Carter exhaled sharply, running up to him and pulling him into a tight embrace. "Are you okay? Did anyone come here?" Oliver frowned. "No, but someone was outside. I saw them through the window. Then they just left." Dr. Carter exchanged a look with Harris. Whoever had come for Oliver had changed their mind. Or worse, they were waiting for something. The agents arrived moments later, scanning the area, making calls. One of them pulled Dr. Carter aside. "We can protect him," he said, "but he won't have a normal life if you stay." Dr. Carter looked at Oliver, who was watching everything with wide eyes, still too young to fully understand. He had spent 10 years giving Oliver a safe, happy life. And now that life was threatened. But as he looked at his son, he knew the choice had already been made. He wasn't going to run. He wasn't going to hide. No matter what came next, he would protect Oliver. Because that's what a father does. As the clerk searched for the documents, Dr. Carter's heart pounded. A few minutes later, she handed him a thin folder. He flipped it open, and immediately something felt off. The records were incomplete. Key pages were missing. His stomach twisted. Hospitals didn't just lose paperwork like this, especially adoption records. Someone had either hidden or erased parts of Oliver's history. Who? And why? As he stepped outside, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Hesitating for a second, he answered. The distorted voice whispered, "Stop asking questions, Dr. Carter. Leave it alone." The line went dead. A chill ran through him. Someone was watching. Someone who didn't want the truth to come out. And now he wasn't just searching for answers, he was in danger. Dr. Carter gripped his phone, his breath shallow. The voice on the other end had been clear. This wasn't just about missing documents or a clerical mistake. Someone didn't want him digging deeper. But why? And more importantly, who? The hospital hallways buzzed with activity, but in one quiet corner of the maternity ward, a newborn lay alone. Nurses passed by, casting sympathetic glances at the tiny baby who had already been abandoned by the world. No one wanted him. Not his birth parents, not the families looking to adopt. His medical complications scared them away. His future looked uncertain, until one man stepped forward. Dr. Matthew Carter had seen thousands of newborns in his career, but something about this little boy stopped him in his tracks. Maybe it was the way his tiny fingers curled around his own, or maybe it was the thought of him growing up without love. Whatever it was, Dr. Carter made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. He adopted the baby no one else wanted. As the years passed, the boy, named Oliver, flourished under Dr. Carter's care. With a loving home and the best medical attention, he grew into a bright, happy child. His once uncertain future now brimmed with possibilities. He laughed, played, and dreamed just like any other kid. The bond between father and son became unbreakable. But just when life seemed perfect, everything changed. 10 years later, an ordinary afternoon turned into a nightmare. It started with a simple medical test, one that Dr. Carter had ordered just as a routine checkup. But I ran a search on the Everton Initiative, Harris said. There's no public record of it, but I found something buried in an old database. Dr. Carter opened the file, his eyes widened. It wasn't just an organization, it was a research program, one that had been shut down years ago. They weren't handling adoptions, Harris continued. They were running experiments. A cold wave washed over Dr. Carter. Experiments? Harris nodded. Testing. Genetic modifications. They were selecting infants for something, then making them disappear. And here's the kicker. The last known facility linked to them was the same hospital where you adopted Oliver. Dr. Carter's head spun. Are you saying Oliver was part of this? I don't know, but someone does, and they don't want you finding out. Before Dr. Carter could respond, a loud screech of tires made them both turn. A black SUV sped toward them, headlights blinding. Harris shoved him back. Run. Dr. Carter barely had time to react before the SUV skidded to a stop, and the doors flew open. Dr. Carter barely had time to move before two men in dark suits stepped out of the SUV. Their faces were unreadable, their movements precise. One of them reached into his jacket, and for a brief, terrifying second, Dr. Carter